All right, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the session, Rural Resiliency Through Policy Collaboration. I want to thank everybody for making it through to this part of the day. I know sitting in front of a computer, although many of us are doing it all day, every day these days, still can be a challenge. So I want to thank everybody for continuing to power through and be part of this session with us here today. My name is Andrew Dumont. I'm a Senior Community Development Analyst at the Federal Reserve Board. I'm going to moderate this session. So before we move into the session, there's just a few housekeeping items to keep us all engaged. You'll have heard this throughout the day, but just to remind you to please join the conversation by using the chat feature to comment, provide your impressions, connect and interact with other participants. I've been watching that all day, and there's been some great conversation in there today, so let's keep that going. In addition, just be sure to also transition your conversation impressions online using the hashtag Rural Resiliency on your favorite social media platform, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, whatever else is out there that I'm not hip enough to know about. Bring this there and let all the people know what's going on here today. I'm sure not everybody that's interested in this topic is tuned in right now, so let's bring them into the conversation that way. And with that taken care of, let's move into the session here. So before we move right into the conversation, I wanted to give you all a sense of who our speakers are and what perspective and experience they're going to be bringing to the conversation. So I'm going to ask them to briefly introduce themselves and their organizations. I'm going to call you guys out because that'll be easier than thinking it's going to work if I just send it out there into the world. And just a reminder to keep it brief. So we'll go and start with Julia, since you are the first person in my little grid here. Just introduce yourself and let folks know where you're coming from.
Sure. Thanks for having me. It's really been great to participate all day long. I just want to say that the speakers today have really filled me up in a way that I didn't know I needed today. So I really, really appreciate it. So Julia Malinowski, I am with Local Initiative Support Corporation. I am based in Durham, North Carolina, and which is not far from River City Community Development Corporation, who we heard from earlier today. And I manage the economic development and digital inclusion work for our rural program, which is Rural LISC. Most folks joining us today probably have some familiarity with LISC. So we're a community development financial institution, and we invest in affordable housing, small business, community safety and justice, and programs that help connect people with financial opportunity. And we do that through grants, loans, and equity. Our rural program, Rural LISC, has been in place for about 25 years. And we have an additional targeted focus on workforce development, broadband infrastructure, digital inclusion, disaster resilience, and placemaking. So a little bit of everything. And our policy focus follows our programmatic strategies. We recently published a document laying out our priorities for the next 2 years, which you can find on our website. And then I think I'm supposed to talk about how we support the work. So we work with and through more than 90 organizations on the ground across 45 states and Puerto Rico, and really pride ourselves, like I think everyone else who's joining this panel, on serving as a connector and a convener for those groups and others, really connecting nonprofits and small businesses to resources, thought leadership, and other opportunities. Glad to be here.
Great. Thanks so much, Julia, and great to have you. I'll pass it over to Nathan now.
Thanks, Andrew, and thanks especially to David and the entire team at the Housing Assistance Council. Really honored to be here with you all today. It's been a great conference and looking forward to a really robust conversation here this afternoon. I'm Nathan Oley. I'm the CEO of the Rural Community Assistance Partnership. For those of you who don't know RCAP, we are a national network of nonprofit partners. So we have 6 regional partners across the country. Through those 6 partners, there's more than 250 technical assistance providers that are on the ground in communities, working with rural and tribal areas in every state and territory across the country. Our focus has always historically been on water, wastewater access, but over the decades, we've also evolved and are doing work around economic development and entrepreneurship, disaster recovery, really almost anything focused on building capacity at the local level. Last year, we served a little over 3.2 million rural and tribal residents across the country, a third of which came from communities that sit well below the federal poverty line. And so our focus is really on the smallest, most distressed areas of the country. And we're really able to do that because of the boots on the ground through our regional partners that have long-term trusted relationships with rural and tribal communities across the country.
Great, thanks, Nathan. We're glad to have you as part of the panel. Chitra, I'll go to you next.
Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for having me here. I'm a senior fellow with Aspen Institute's Community Strategies Group. So if you're not familiar, Aspen Institute is a global nonpartisan nonprofit organization committed to realizing a free and just, equitable society. And CSG, Community Strategies Group, has been active since 1985 and really helping to convene and equip and inspire local leaders as they build more prosperous regions and advance those living on the economic margins. And 75% of our work has been with rural America. So if you asked about which areas more specifically we work in, there's sort of three buckets. We've been working on regional development and resilience, on family well-being, and then on community and economic development philanthropy. So lots of community philanthropy organizations. And as I mentioned, a lot of the work we do is convening, and we see ourselves as being a catalyst and a hub for a lot of interaction between the diverse partners in rural America.
Thanks, Chitra. Glad to have you. And David, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Andrew. Although I think if you get to this point in the HAC conference and you don't know who we are, you're a remarkable person. Look, I'm thrilled to be here. David Lipsetz, CEO of the Housing Assistance Council. And since most of the folks tuning in know what we do, let me just take a moment to say the folks in the boxes just around me here, you're amazing peers. I really love that not only you're given some time today to do this, but your work inspires us. And we're thrilled to partner with you. And so I really appreciate you being here. And Andrew, you're not just a great moderator, you're a good friend to our organization, and you've really helped our field significantly with your work. So thank you all for being here.
Well, thank you very much for that, David, and thank you for the invite. You guys do a lot more out there than I do. I just get to study what you guys do and think about it, and hopefully say something that is somewhat meaningful. But appreciate all the work you guys do. As you can see, we have a wide range of expertise and perspectives on the panel. A good amount of overlap, which is good. Just like you all out there in rural America, folks at the national level have to do a little bit of everything as well. So, there's a good amount of overlap there, and I don't think that's a bad thing. But there's a lot of, I think, also great, unique expertise in these different organizations, whether it's with community philanthropy, water, wastewater, economic development, housing. Each of the organizations really has something that they know particularly well. And I think that sort of overlap and that sort of unique perspective is going to lend us well for a great conversation today. So glad to be a part of that. So moving to the panel discussion, I wanted to start with you, Chitra, and there's a reason why these organizations in particular are on this panel. And just thought, since Aspen was a big part of that, that you might want to give us a little background. Why these particular organizations for this conversation about collaboration?
Sure, Andrew. So thanks. I have to admit that I'm a fairly short timer, or I've been with the CSG for only a short amount of time, since March. So I have to acknowledge that when this collaboration got started, it was really the brainchild of Janet Topolsky, who's the executive director of CSG, and also acknowledge Catherine Ferguson, who's the associate director, but on leave right now, and I'm standing in for. They really have done the lion's share of the work with standing up a lot of the initiatives that have come into through CSG. And when the conference idea actually came out of back when Nathan started at RCAP, and I'm told Janet approached Nathan and said, hey, we really need to have some kind of conference, some kind of convening where folks can talk in a very integrated way about these issues. And there really isn't a space out there to do that right now. And from our years of working on rural, Janet has been there for 20 some plus years with CSG and working on these issues for many, many more, really understood that on the ground, rural communities work with many hats on all the time, and they don't think of housing or wastewater or economic development as separate things. It's all part of a cohesive whole. And so why can't we do that at the national level as well? So they started talking about this and said we really need to have a convening, a summit. They thought of it as a actual multi-day event. Called it the Rural Opportunity and Development Summit, or ROADS, and had plans to involve a whole bunch of other organizations, of course, but the first up next were HAC and LISC to be the partners at the national level who are at this cross-section and just really start off the planning and the fundraising to do this much broader summit. So that's how it got started. Of course, we had a lot of knowledge because we had been at the same time working on something called the Hubs Report. So we had been doing some research here at CSG to look at how intermediary organizations that wear these multiple hats and are intermediaries on the ground, how they do so many innovative things, and they don't look the same, they don't do the same things, but they're all trying to be allies and these sort of cross-sector organizations. And we put that into this Rural Hubs report, which you can find on our website, and that was published last November. So we have a lot of basis for this, and just happy to be here to talk about it some more.
Thanks, Chitra. Thanks for that background. And David, I want to turn over to you. Chitra mentioned some work sort of exploring capacity and talking about this conference and folks getting together and collaborating to really address the whole needs of a community. This conference idea wasn't the first time that at least a couple of the members of this foursome had worked together to inform the national dialogue. Could you talk a little bit about HAC's work with Aspen and others on rural data and media coverage and sort of what the needs of practitioners out there are?
Thanks, Andrew. I appreciate it. And as we at HAC, we learn often. We do a tremendous amount of work in tribal areas. You're always standing on the shoulders of 7 generations. There's always a story before the story, kind of thing. So to directly address what Andrew's talking about, and then maybe give a little previous context. The work that several of us did right after the Obama administration, as several of us were leaving that time and coming together as rural folks, looking back and having some critique of our time in that administration. Think we did a world of good, but there were some challenges, and some of those were around really addressing rural. We got together and we're collaborating, and several of us, Catherine Ferguson, who you heard mentioned earlier, and a few others, got together and approached Ford Foundation. They gave us a couple of bucks, and we put together a collaborative at that point where we were able to really bear down on 3 topics. And we've published all 3 of those and since moved on from that time. But hopefully in the chat here, you'll get a couple of those links that we knew data is a foundational issue. So we did a deep dive with the Urban Institute to look at the quality of data on the communities we were studying. We knew that the narrative was very challenging for all of us, that it was keeping us individually apart, but also keeping it an us and them of the other, and ours is a group of communities that has a lot of poverty and challenges spread throughout it. And so we did a report where we did a deep dive on media coverage and the narrative that gets told about rural places. And so we're trying to put that out. And then the third piece was a landscape assessment. And I would bet half of the people who are listening on this call were some of the ones who we interviewed for that, and then published that out as well. And the reason, the thing that animates my thing about this more than anything is that those things didn't exist. It's my experience early on in the previous administration was at HUD, where there is this deep, immense, extraordinary group of advocates and organizations, lenders and borrowers, and you name it, all focused in and have been started. Every single one of them that I know of has been started by the tremendous work of Julia's organization and some of the other national intermediaries in their investment. And boy, halfway through the administration, I moved over to USDA, and all it was, the group Nathan works for now and Chitra, but the list was really short and the foundational elements weren't there. And so Catherine and myself and a few others who were focused on it really said, we got to step back. We can't just go invent something. We can't just start some group when we really need to know where we're starting from.
That's great. There's always a history. And it is so important that folks get together and collaborate and figure out what those needs are, shine a light on this. And you guys have done a great job at that. And I think it started to build that as we talked about preparing for this session, starting to build that muscle memory.
Before I put myself back on mute here, I actually want to do a shameless plug for you that you're not going to do. Andrew's collecting a bunch of us to write a book on what works in rural development and community development in rural places with the imprimatur of the Fed, which is a phenomenal commitment of one of the nation's best resources. And so I know you've tagged probably all of us to write a chapter or two, and I swear I'm almost done. It's almost drafted, Andrew. But I really appreciate the Fed leaning in as well here. Sorry, I forgot to mention that.
No, that's okay. That's okay. No, I was going to say, I was going to mention that later. Don't worry, I'll get my piece in there. But yeah, so we know that this is so important to shine this light on here and bring some more great minds. I mean, there are great minds working on this, but we want more. We want more for rural, all of us. So why do we want that? Why is it important for us to be sitting around the table together, Nathan? This stuff takes time. It takes energy. It takes time and energy that could be doing other stuff. We were just talking as the lead up to this. We're all busy. We've all got a bajillion emails in our inboxes, except for, Nathan, who files them all out immediately. But this stuff takes time and money. So why spend the effort to do this? Why are these collaborations so important?
It's really, the question is, the heart of this collaboration is why, right? Why did we come together as a group? Why are there other groups that are coming together? And, to me, from RCAP's perspective, the first and foremost reason behind it is it's part of our DNA. We're literally called the Rural Community Assistance Partnership. And if we don't live and breathe and abide by that goal of working with others, we're not living our own mission and our own cause. And so it's really important to us as an organization to think collaboratively, to reach out, to listen, and understand where we can bring resources and expertise and where we can help build bridges to bring in additional resources and expertise, or utilize other organizations who are doing fantastic work, and understand how that might impact our work in a really unique way. And most importantly, how it's going to actually impact the communities we serve. For us, we're fundamentally about serving communities. And if we're not willing to bring people to the table for rural communities, if we're not willing to sit at other people's table, we're doing a disservice to the communities that we're trying to serve. From a broader perspective, the need is so incredible. David talked about that aspect of being at USDA and seeing maybe a limited number of organizations that were really focused on this, or doing it in a public way, in a way that was loud and effective. And so it's really important because the need is so incredible. All of you on this call understand that need implicitly. It's an intentional piece of what you do every single day. And we all know that we can't do that work ourselves, that we need to do it collectively, that we need to be reaching out to others, utilizing resources and expertise from across the spectrum of organizations if we're truly going to make a difference for rural and tribal areas across this country. And third of all, it comes down to working with good people and good organizations. Everyone you see on this call is committed to their cause. They're committed to serving. And it's part of what they want to do every day. You talked, Andrew, about the time it takes to build these relationships. It does. It takes time, it takes effort, it takes resources, just the same way as it does when you're working directly with communities. It takes time, it takes effort, it takes resources. And it's really important to understand that you have some solutions, but you don't have all the solutions. And so working with good people and good organizations is really at the heart of helping assist communities where they need it the most and ensuring that they have the resources they need to build their own capacity, to think about their own future and the prosperity of their community, and to understand that there are tons of great organizations out there, and where there's opportunities to collaborate, it benefits everyone.
I think that's great. And pulling on that thread and one that David mentioned earlier, not just wanting to go out and stand up another organization is the point of collaboration. What I think is so great and why it's so worthwhile talking across organizations is don't reinvent the wheel. I mean, whether it's doing a data scan, has somebody already done that before and I just don't know about the report, or whether it's somebody sort of figured out a great solution to something that one of my network members or one of the folks I'm working with in a community just needs to know about and can benefit from. I mean, it allows you to show up better for the communities that you're working with, and not reinventing something that already happens or standing up an organization that already exists and sort of funneling that expertise there instead of spending time and resources and money inventing something that already exists. So I think it is really about showing up in the best way possible for the folks that we're trying to support. So Chitra alluded to this earlier. We sort of came together with the original intention that we were going to do this great, it was going to be like a 400 or 500 person summit. It was going to be over 3 days. We were like, I kid you not, like 2 days from signing a contract on a venue when COVID happened. So Julia, COVID happened. There was this nationwide movement to raise up and address racial inequities in this country. And that all happened right as this group was meeting really on a weekly, bi-weekly basis to talk about what we were going to do together. How did that pivot happen? I mean, that wasn't going to happen anymore. That wasn't the right thing anymore. So what happened? How did we go from that and turn and move forward?
Sure. So, and I think, not only were we planning this joint conference, but I think everyone on this panel was also planning their own national conference at the same time as well. So it was a real double kind of what now moment in a lot of ways. And I was really thankful that we were all together for a lot of reasons, one of which was being able to just bounce off each other. Okay, what are you doing with your conference? What are the safest choices for everyone involved, right? So we talked, and what, we all know to be true is that being a practitioner doing this work in rural can be isolating. It's one of the reasons why we all really focus on investing resources and bringing people together, like the symposium. We all put on conferences and find other avenues to connect folks over shared experiences, learnings, and struggles, that peer-to-peer, which is so critical. And we knew that we wanted to find a way to still help play that connecting and bridging role, because during this time, we knew that it was going to be needed more than ever, right? And that's when we came together to co-develop the road sessions. So we took the S in seminar and we changed it to sessions and ran with it. And then, the other thing, one of the things David brought up and has been brought up several times is just the challenge of the rural narrative. So I think, the other thing that we really looked at is what is the rural narrative that's being put out during this time, right? During the time of COVID and this moment of racial reckoning, what's being shared out. And so we looked at the webinars and virtual convenings that were being put on in response, and so much good content, but we did see what we saw was, I would say, some gaps, some opportunities, right? Some missed opportunities to share some of the experiences and learnings that we knew were happening on the ground that were not being elevated in the national conversation. And that's particularly around our rural communities of color that we all work in and support. 21% of the rural population identifies as Black, Indigenous, or people of color. And, Lance earlier today and his team. Am I good now? Okay, there was an echo. Lance earlier today identified that I think 90% of rural communities have become more diverse over the last 10 years. And that's something that we felt really strongly needed to be lifted up, those narratives during this time and how those communities are, what their experiences have been during this time. And so we really intentionally, with the 4 sessions that we put on, lifted up BIPOC leaders. And then we also really wanted to lift up opportunities to show kind of cross-cutting strategies, things that are innovative in rural, because there is so much innovation happening in rural. One thing that was brought up was that in rural, everyone does everything, right? You have to do everything. And that leads to so much innovation. Our last session, we highlighted organizations working in rural health systems and how they're looking at the drivers of health, social determinants, and how that's pushing them to go beyond just what we think of as health. And then the other thing we really focused on was trying to raise up super action-oriented strategies for nonprofits and community leaders, knowing that folks need something they can implement now. And so really raising up what's happening today on the ground in one place that tomorrow a community leader might be able to pick up and try out.
Great, thank you so much for that. And those road sessions, I found to be incredibly insightful, and I got a ton out of them. So I hope if you all watching have not viewed those, they're all available online. I highly encourage you to check them out. We're still, turns out, in the middle of this. And so I think the content in there, unfortunately, is as timely as ever. So I definitely encourage you to check it out. So we're going to move forward and just think a little broader about COVID response. We did the road sessions. They were great. They were not the only thing that the collaboration led to. And David alluded to it before. I'll plug my own work now. One thing that it helped me with is, as David mentioned, we're the Federal Reserve Board and the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis are working on a few things, but one being a comprehensive book around rural development and some successful strategies around promoting inclusive, collaborative, tailored, and resilient rural development in communities of color, other marginalized rural communities, and really, I think an approach that will work anywhere. We're particularly focused on disadvantaged communities, but I think it's a strategy that'll work whether you're disadvantaged or not. And there's going to be some great case studies, some great stories in there to be out in the fall. And a lot of these folks helped to shape what that was going to look like, and getting really, I think, a great diverse set of authors. Somebody from all of these organizations is going to be represented. So just a great collaboration from us in building that trust and using that to source for that, which we hope will be a great resource for you all out there. So keep your eyes out on that. And I just want to kick it over to the rest of the panel here. How has this collaboration allowed you to more effectively respond to the crisis, whether it's from a policy or community support standpoint? And Julia was just on here, so I'll maybe kick that over to Nathan. I know that you and Julia did a little bit of partnership on some small business stuff. So you want to talk about that a little bit?
I'll talk a little bit. Julia's really doing the yeoman's work. I mean, the things that Rural LISC and LISC in general are doing on the small business side is absolutely incredible. But, a little bit of context. COVID obviously has had a ginormous impact on small businesses across the country, both big communities and small communities. But when you look at the landscape of small businesses, 2/3 of small businesses when COVID hit didn't have any kind of online presence. And so automatically, as they started to close their doors, they were limited in their ability to continue to work and operate because they fundamentally didn't have the aspect of serving a market online. And so we've spent some time through some of our regional partners, particularly Communities Unlimited, who's our southern regional partner, has done a really robust online toolkit to try and help small businesses that have been affected by COVID, and even those that maybe haven't been as affected by COVID, to pivot to an online setting and make sure they're utilizing all the resources at their stead. The other big thing, and I'll let Julia talk about what they're doing, but we have 2 CDFIs in our network, and those CDFIs are on the ground in communities, both providing capital, but also technical assistance to those businesses at the same time. And it's such a crucial aspect. The PPP loan program was an incredible opportunity, but also really difficult for small communities to access and small businesses and small communities to access. And so CDFIs have been just a truly, really impactful piece of that capital stack to ensure that the small businesses in rural and tribal areas get access, not just to PPP funds, obviously, but also larger capital access. And LISC has a ton of programs that they've already put in place that is providing direct access to small businesses now. And so I'll let Julia talk about those.
Sure. Thanks, Nathan. And yeah, I mean, the work, so I can talk a little bit. We've been really fortunate at LISC to be able to work with a lot of national philanthropy to build out a small business grants program to really drive funding directly to small businesses with a focus on reaching some of those small businesses who are not able to tap some of the other federal subsidies that have been coming down the pike. And so, since spring, just in rural, we've dispersed more than $13 million in COVID response-specific grants to more than 1,100 small businesses, and that's scaling up rapidly because our current National Small Business Grant Program is focused exclusively on driving additional grant capital rural communities. So it's a really fortunate position. It's really exciting work, but it's also an incredible amount of work to get that money out the door and get the word out to small businesses who may not be online, right, in small communities. And that's where, I think our relationships, I know the relationships that we've invested in, both at the local level, but regionally and nationally with these groups who are here, really helped us move so much faster and better when it came to being able to move and deploy those funds. And then the other thing I'd say, just, to go back to some of the members of the RCAP network, so Communities Unlimited and RCAC, Rural Community Assistance Corporation, what we know is that, for a small business owner, money is not a magic bullet, right? Money alone does not move the needle in any context. And it needs to be paired with that technical assistance and know-how, particularly during this time, right? And that's where our partnership with some of the organizations in the RCAP network was really so critical. We have deep relationships with both of those organizations, but really hadn't engaged with them in the context of those lines of businesses, right? And so in this instance, though, we had the relationships, we're able to leverage those to reach out and really develop some deeper relationships there and, get that support to some of the small businesses. And then also, RCAP and Nathan have been a part of organizing Rural Rise, which is a community of rural ecosystem builders. And so, we were also able to leverage that network that he's helped pull together to identify other groups providing that critical small business technical assistance to do some of that matchmaking and support to make sure that ecosystem and infrastructure is in place where for small businesses across the country and rural communities.
Great, excellent work by both of you. So the session's also on policy collaboration. I know Chitra and David have both been, Aspen and Hack have both been involved in the policy conversation and trying to raise up some priorities for potential COVID relief. So Chitra, do you want to talk a little bit about what Aspen has been trying to do on the policy front, and then David, you next?
Sure. For the interest of time, I'll just highlight a couple of things because, of course, we do a fair bit on this. But the two things that come up are one important thing that came up is that we have a relationship where we've supported something called the Rural Development Innovation Group over time. And this is a set of leaders, practitioners across the country who got together several years ago before the 2016 election and started talking about what rural development principles should be, what it should look like. And so we had, because of that group that already existed, they had a voice, and we knew that they had something to say about what was going on, especially with the initial response. And so, we asked the question of them, and they decided on their own to put together recommendations for the Hill and for the administration on if there was an additional stimulus bill, how that could be more responsive to the needs of the practitioners and the communities that are in our networks. And so we were able to, just see that idea. They did the rest. And because of this network, we were able to distribute it and get a lot of signatories. They were able to get a lot of signatories. And so that's just, the power of having these relationships and working on other things together and be able to share information. So, that's us being catalyst and a hub on these issues. And David, I think I can pass it over to you if you want to share anything more.
Very, very similar. Thanks, Chitra. And it was fantastic watching the work you did there. We have started to take a more proactive. Hack has for a long time been a resource for folks on the Hill and the department. So call us. We'll give them our nonpartisan, completely well-researched view on something. And you know what? It takes more than that. And I've really realized that we have to take that information and get it out there in this policy setting. We've been doing policy sign-on letters. We did one recently. Unacceptable that the CARES Act had this many dollars in it for rural housing programs and some of the other things. So when they came in to do COVID relief in Congress and didn't commit to rural places, you've lifted some boats, but not others by doing that. And so we backed up and said, okay, we need a coalition of folks. We got 100 plus of fantastic organizations sign on, sending a letter up to the Hill, said, don't do that again. If you have another stimulus bill, we need you to make sure you include rural. And I'll express a little positive, just that doing this remotely has been really hard, but having these peers and others has been extraordinarily helpful for us, and it's taught us a lot about how to move these things forward. Great,
thank you. So we are going to take audience Q&A. So encourage you. We've got 17 minutes or so left. encourage you, if you have any questions, use the chat function on the YouTube, and somehow they will get to me and we'll make sure that they get answered. But want to take your questions. If you have any for our panelists here, feel free to submit them. And while we wait for those, so I know it's hard to think about the future, about what comes next. You know, it seems like every day we're all just waiting for the other shoe to drop, and things are going in the wrong direction in terms of case rates, and you know, there's some concerns about what that's going to do to the economy. So it's so easy to focus on the now, and yet the future is going to arrive. So how do we as a collaboration put our thumb on the scale to make sure that rural isn't forgotten in the next, in how people are thinking about the future and sourcing resources for the future? So how do you see this collaboration or other collaborations that you're involved in informing that policy conversation with respect to the medium and long-term recovery? So Chitra, I know you had some thoughts on that when we were in.
Yeah, I can jump in on that. So, you know, I've spent most of my career in federal government, you know, as a bureaucrat, as a career civil servant, and I've seen how institutions, how the legislation and the programs are were set up in ways that funding and assistance gets put out in very siloed ways. Whether you're talking about organizational, the infrastructure, or sorry, the resources for building concrete infrastructure, you know, physical infrastructure, or the resources for the people, the soft infrastructure. And we know that that's very true for rural places. It comes, and yet communities think of it, their resources in much more holistic ways. So we really formed this collaboration out of all those elements that we know communities, the way the communities see their work, which is, you know, these folks here, housing, economic development, water, wastewater, like those components. And so we think we're modeling how things ought to work, right? So both at the national level, at more regional, and lifting up those voices at the local level that are doing similar things. So, you know, if you look at the people that were highlighted in every one of the road sessions, they are phenomenal examples of how this work is being done. And they are, if we didn't lift them up, if we didn't share, it's easy to forget about them. It's easy for funders and for policymakers or decision makers to think that it's not possible. And that's the first reason why people will skip over an idea and move on to what's been the status quo. And we know the status quo is not working. So I hope, just by the virtue of us coming together and doing the road series and highlighting left out voices, that we're sort of contributing to the momentum that's already been there, that I think is already there to work across silos, to work in a more integrated way on all of these issues. And hopefully that will make a difference even in the conversations around policy directions for the new administration, the new Congress. You know, we don't know, but we hope. We can only hope. You want to add anything? Anyone else?
Yeah, I would add on that, and it really does start to pull in some of what I'm seeing in the chat as well. We can't lift up local voices in the way that we have done, you know, with duct tape and baling wire for years and years anymore, and feel like we're going to have an impact, right? We need resources. We need national organizations that can create that platform, just like we did all day today. Rural Rise, the Thrive work that's going on at ASP, just all this list is extraordinary at this, but we can't do it unless we really start to create that platform. And so I love that we're great partners with our locals there. I would also pull on one thread that Chitra was talking about, that when the moment comes, when the new president gets elected, when the crisis happens, you already have to be standing there with your piece of paper in hand because the whole crowd goes whizzing by and you have to say, like, here's the great idea, grab this one. And rural doesn't have that. We don't have the infrastructure that is created by having philanthropy at our door regularly helping us do think. And we don't have it by having national capacity building intermediaries that are fully focused on rural. I would say that LISC is doing a great job of pushing us all in that direction right now. They're really taking some resources that have long been crafted for suburban and urban places and leaning into rural, but we need way more of that. So I really, I hope when to answer some of the chat that when you hear us talking about roads, you see it as us making an effort with what we have, but this isn't the solution. This is one piece. And we need multiple pieces if we're going to do this, and they need to grow extraordinarily. So part of it's the moral imperative that we put on folks. Part of it's the hard elbow grease work that we're doing. And hopefully we can come out of this pandemic in better shape, better connected with growing resources.
And just to add on quickly to what David and Chitra just talked about, rural itself hasn't done a good enough job collectively of telling these stories. You know, even when we're talking about rural issues, typically it becomes one about agriculture, or even nutrition programs, if we're talking USDA in particular. Rural development, rural economic development, rural community development hasn't had a collective voice in a way that other entities have had. And so if you look back from the 2008 recession, you know, rural communities were just starting to get to where they were pre-recession when COVID hit. And it's on all of us collectively to make sure that we take bold and decisive action to ensure that that doesn't happen after COVID. And so the collective knowledge, the collective passion, the collective work that we all are doing is really imperative to pushing that narrative forward, to highlighting the stories, to talking about outcomes as opposed to outputs, and ensuring that we do put a bold, aggressive plan and implement on that plan to make sure that the communities don't get left behind like they did in the recession.
So David, you mentioned there needs to be national intermediary focused on rural, you know, and mentioned that we didn't have that. I think that all of these organizations on the panel right now are that and do amazing stuff. So I don't think you're giving yourself enough credit. What I do think is true is that you don't have enough resources. Right? I think that you guys could all do a heck of a lot more with a heck of a lot more money. So I'll go back and, you know, we've got about 10 more minutes here. So maybe end where we started, which is this stuff takes time and it takes money. So to the point of a few of the questions that have come in, there's a new administration, there's a new Congress. The composition of that Congress may or may not be any different, but there certainly is a new administration, and it's entirely possible that there's another relief bill coming in the future. So as we think about capacity in rural to do meaningful, collaborative, whole community, you know, development work to make vital rural places, what does that look like? You know, what are we asking for? Is it more funding for the same programs? Is it new programs? Is it changing what behavior we incentivize? I know we've talked a lot about getting away from project-based funding and funding capacity instead or in addition to projects. So what does that agenda look like? What does that policy agenda? What does that money agenda look like? And what does that look like for the new administration? But let's not let, you know, philanthropy off the hook here. We know what the numbers look like there, and they're, you know, they should be ashamed of it. You know, there's some that are stepping up, but they could do more. So So what does that agenda look like from your perspective on how we incentivize people with money and policy to do this kind of work?
I'm happy to start. I think what you said about, shifting from being so project focused, with our incentives is critical. I think we need to acknowledge that our dominant culture, right, pushes us to be transactional, right? We value quantity, right? We value productivity, right? How many things can you create? How many things can you do? And I think there are a lot of scenarios in which it's appropriate to count those numbers, right? But I think there are a lot of scenarios where they're counting those is disincentivizing the right long-term moves. So, if you take a transactional approach in a lot of rural communities, small communities, you are encouraging this approach, this mindset of scarcity, right? Because there are only so many numbers you can count in a small community, right? So everyone wants to count as many numbers as they can, right? Because they need to get those dollars, right? And so it's disincentivizing that critical collaboration. And I think what we all care about, right, is systems change, right? Generational change. And that's not, you can't capture that. That doesn't happen based off measures of productivity. That happens based on the development of deep, long-term relationships, right? And I think there are ways that you can incentivize and track that are evidence-based, right? That don't have that same, don't set people up in the way that I think right now we are incentivizing people.
Well, just to add into that quickly, there's a context here that's really important as well, right? It can't just be pure numbers, right? If you're talking about the creation of 10 jobs, for example, in a community of 1,500, that's fundamentally different than 10 jobs in a community of 150,000. And so there's a context that needs to be layered in, whether we're talking federal resources, philanthropic, that really needs to be tailored to ensure that rural and tribal areas can show that outcome and that impact in unique ways.
I also think we need, maybe I should tuck the impulse away, but we need to take a look at what we're doing that's hurting right now. It's not just throwing some more money at a capacity building or a housing program that exists today. The systems change that Julia refers to is that there are elements to the structure of the way in which our government works and our private markets work that are creating and reifying this issue. There is no way to build public housing or vouchers or self-help housing or anything that's ever going to catch up to the hole that we're in. Right? It's my dad used to say, if you're standing in the hole, first thing to do is put the shovel down. And the shovel in our housing world is that there's $7 trillion a year Fannie Mae GSE in incentives that the staff there is working hard to get to rural places, but the structure of a GSE like that doesn't get the funds to rural places, or the Community Reinvestment Act, which I love dearly. And I think it's had immensely positive impacts, pushes affordable capital to a geography that does not include rural. That's just not okay. We'll never catch up with that unless we get someone who can break through the narrative at the federal level and say, here, look what we're doing. First, do no harm. And here are some of the ways in which you're making the poorest communities persistently poor. And that's not okay. So sorry if I went a little too far there, but
sometimes you got to step on some toes if you want to win the race. So there. Go ahead, Chitra.
I just wanted to plug and add in that one of the programs or initiatives that we've been leading in Aspen is Thrive Rural. David mentioned it earlier, which is which is a partnership between us and University of Wisconsin, supported by Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, and really recognizes that there's a lot more work that needs to be done in this space. And it's just it's a drop in the bucket. There's so much that needs to be done. But part of our work is really trying to show where investments are going, and through a kind of a process of laying out a theory of change of like, how do we get to where we want to go? Like, what would it take? And identify the gaps and sort of have a common agenda that everyone can rally around, and show how their individual pieces will make this comprehensive whole. And, it's a long road, and this is sort of more for the 10-year, not where David was mentioning is, we need to already have been for this administration, but, it's all, I think, pointing in the same direction, I think, and sharing with evidence what practitioners may know to be true, but to do it in such a way that it's building even more momentum towards the change we want to see. So, this is a long game, a long-term process, and I think we're going to have sprints, and hopefully this sprint that we have coming up here is going to be take us in the break through some of these administrative hurdles and funding hurdles and move us in the right direction.
Julie, I saw you come off mute. Did you have something you want to add? I think that'll be the last word before we go to wrap here.
So I think you said something about not letting philanthropy off the hook. And I did. I did just want to call out the fact that there are funders. So the Appalachia Funders Network has been collaborating across the region for 10 years and has been really pushing support for collaboration at all levels. And, just earlier this week, the St. Louis Fed helped convene the Delta Philanthropy Forum, and there's a similar effort in that region as well. So I think more and more we're seeing great signs that philanthropy is coming along and wanting to do more and think more about how they support more holistically. So I do just want to, shout out some of the folks who are really stepping up.
Thank you. And our book will have a couple of great philanthropies that are showing how more foundations can really support communities. So keep your eyes out for that. So I do just want to thank our presenters for sharing their experience and expertise. It's been a great conversation.